I feel fine.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Rocket Tranquility, we copy you on the ground.
New possibilities are opening up for scientific cooperation between countries.
1-0. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Discovery, go and throttle up.
Discovery, roger. Go for deploy.
Everybody in the shuttle program, the crew is go for launch.
Rocket, nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
Good afternoon. I'm NASA's Megan Cruz, and you are watching a press briefing ahead of tomorrow's Crew 9 launch attempt. NASA and SpaceX are targeting tomorrow, September 28th at 1:17 p.m. Eastern Time for liftoff of NASA astronaut Nick Hague and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov to the International Space Station. Once there, they'll become part of Expedition 72 to maintain the orbiting lab and conduct groundbreaking research there. To take your questions about this mission, we have these folks here on the dais. To my left, we have NASA Associate Administrator Jim Free. Next to him, Ken Bowersox, Associate Administrator for NASA's Space Operations Mission Directorate. Steve Stitch, Manager, NASA's Commercial Crew Program. Dina Contella, Deputy Manager, NASA's International Space Station Program. Jennifer Buckley, Chief Scientist, NASA's International Space Station Program. And joining us virtually from Hawthorne, California, we have Bill Gerstenmaier, Vice President, Build and Flight Reliability over at SpaceX. And then finally, back to the dais here, Brian Sizix, Launch Weather Officer, 45th Weather Squadron, Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. All right, thank you all for being here. We're being told to smile. We're smiling. Let's go down the line with some opening remarks before we open it up for questions. So let's start with you, Jim.
Great. Thanks, Megan, and thanks to everybody that'll be presenting today, and for all of you for being here or online. As you'll hear more from Dina, it is continuing to be a busy time aboard the space station. And just about 3 weeks ago, many of our teams are working hard to bring Starliner home, and I do want to take a moment to commend the NASA and Boeing teams for their diligence during that flight test and the commitment that we always have, all of our teams have, to flying safely. You might have thought things would slow down after that, but as always, there's never a dull moment aboard Space Station. The week after Starliner's return, NASA astronaut Don Pettit launched aboard a Soyuz spacecraft with his two cosmonaut partners on September 11th and increased the station crew size to 12. The crew in space has been studying how plants grow in microgravity, conducting eye exams, and maintaining orbital plumbing systems and more, while teams at NASA and SpaceX on the ground prepared for the next set of operations. Monday of this week, Tracy Dyson returned to Earth and wrapped up a 6-month mission aboard ISS, and it was absolutely awesome to see her face when she came out of that capsule, smiling really big as she always does. We know that this launch is a bit unique in moving from the planned 4 crew members to 2, and teams on the ground, as I said, have been working to update Dragon's configuration to support the change, and I do want to thank SpaceX for their support and flexibility to get us here on the verge of launch. I want to thank all the teams that continue to impress us all with their dedication and ability to adapt and constant professionalism as well. We are continuing to pave the way for great things in space, and I look forward to everything this next crew will accomplish together. With that, let me turn it over to Sox.
Hey, thanks, Jim. Hey, well, I appreciate all of you joining us here today. It's nice to see so many people who are interested in our missions, and I know you're probably as excited as I am to think about Crew 9 joining Expedition 72 on station, to think about Crew 8 coming home, and all the great work that Expedition 72 folks will be doing during their 5 months on orbit. All of our missions have unique challenges, and this one I think will be memorable for a lot of us. First, Hurricane Helene The effect here was pretty small, just a little bit of a delay in our operations. We know there's folks up in the Panhandle that had a much larger impact from the storm, and we'll be thinking about them as we execute the Crew 9 mission. And I know our station folks are doing whatever they can now to try and help with the efforts up there. We had a pretty big change in our crew complement for this mission, going from 4 people on the crew to 2 people on the crew so we could free up a couple of empty seats. It's so impressive to see the professionalism of our astronaut team, both Nick and Alexander, as they've dealt with the changes that they have to make so that they can handle the ascent and prepare to integrate with the new crew, but also Zena and Stephanie, who gave up their seats on this mission. I just want you to know we're going to find spots for them to fly, and we really appreciate how hard it is to give up a mission and wait a little bit longer. And then we've got 2 pads. We've moved to a new launch pad. It is great to have that flexibility to be able to use either 39A or Slick 40 for launches. And you'll hear more about that from Steve and Gerst. But I am really happy to see us able to execute off of either pad. My job is to kind of cheerlead and watch the work of our programs, and I am so proud of the commercial crew team, the ISS team, our partners at SpaceX, and the work they've done here today. And I know you're eager to hear about the details of their work, so I'll pass over to Steve now.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for those kind words, and thank all of you for joining us here today, and appreciate your continued interest in the commercial crew program and human spaceflight. Super excited about this flight. It's great to be back here in Florida, getting ready to launch Nick and Alex on their way on Crew 9. It's an important flight for us in many ways, but as Ken mentioned, this is our first flight off of Pad 40. We started working on this capability a couple years ago. Our teams worked very hard to certify the pad. We completed that certification through the flight readiness process. That pad's ready to go. A lot of hard work by our team in working hand in hand with the FAA and the Eastern Range, and then it's great to be on the Space Force side for our first launch. We had our launch readiness review this morning. We are proceeding toward launch and proceed toward the launch time of 1:17 p.m. Tomorrow on Saturday the 28th. We rolled out a little late this morning. You know, we had to go back to the hangar for the hurricane and got out there a little bit late. We are vertical at the pad, and the next big activity will be loading the cargo here this afternoon and then getting ready for flight. We do have backup opportunities if we don't make, if the weather's not good or we don't make it Sunday, September the 29th and the 30th, we have opportunities on the range. If we launch on Saturday, we'll dock on Sunday, September 29th at about 5:30 Eastern. It's about a 28-hour rendezvous from the pad to the space station. As you know, we've been watching the weather all week with Hurricane Helene. My thoughts and prayers are with those in the Panhandle area of Florida that have gone through the bad weather. But we were able to get out and do our static fire and dry dress on Tuesday before the weather hit. That went really well. We were able to get Nick and Alex into the vehicle, get their suits checked out, their seats checked out. That went fine. And then late that evening, we did a static fire of the vehicle and checked out the 6 M1D engines in the first stage, loaded the second stage with propellant, and that went well. Then we buttoned up the vehicle, did some inspections of the engines, buttoned up the vehicle, brought it back into the hangar, and then rolled back out. Bill will talk a little bit more about the operation for static fire, but we did have a couple issues on the pad. The chilled water system that's used for Dragon, this provides cooling up into the Dragon spacecraft. We had a little bit of a leak, a relief valve relieved right close to launch. The SpaceX team have gone back in and fixed that valve, and we don't think we'll have a problem for launch. And then we had a very unusual problem where, of course, the LOX RP Merlin engines produce soot as a byproduct, and at Pad 40, that soot goes out and exhaust out to the east toward the water, and the wind of the day blew that soot back over onto the Dragon spacecraft. So when we rolled the vehicle back in, we inspected Dragon and we found soot in several areas on the vehicle. We were able to work through that, clean the solar arrays, clean several areas, go in and do some repainting of the Dragon spacecraft. The SpaceX team did an incredible job of repainting, in particular quadrants 1 and a little touch up on 4, and got it all cleaned up and ready to go. Paint is important for spaceflight in that it has to be designed to both absorb heat and keep things warm, and then also reject a certain amount of energy from the sun. And so we worked through all that. We have a couple things to close out, but we're really on track for flight. Let's see, we're also flying for the first time since Crew 4, a second flight booster. When we moved this launch out to September, we allowed SpaceX to go take our 1085 booster and fly another Starlink flight. It's good for us to get that data, but our team had to work through some certification, and we worked through all that. Of course, we've been following the fleet and the Starlink anomalies, the stage 2 anomaly on the MVAC. We worked through that with SpaceX. We also worked through the hard landing with SpaceX. They've been doing a great job of sharing data with us. A couple other unique things I'll mention, capabilities of the Dragon vehicle. We have a unique capability for the first time on Crew 8 and Crew 9. It's an emergency contingency capability for landing where if the main parachutes were all to fail, the Super Draco thrusters will fire right before the vehicle would make contact with the water, and then it would be an emergency configuration to save the crew on a really bad day. So that's enabled and going to fly for the first time on Crew 8. And then for Crew 8, we also extended our capability. You know, we have a 210-day certified limit of Dragon, which is about October 1st for this, and we've extended that out by 30 days. So we had to go through and look at the windows, the structure, all the rotating machinery, the avionics, the thermal protection system, the prop systems, and we went through that certification and extended it out to 240 days. We'll have a little longer handover from Crew 8 to Crew 9, and that's really to deconfigure the Crew 8 emergency return and seats for Butch and Sunny. If we could go to a graphic, we have a couple of graphics I'd like to show. The first one, this is what the contingency seat configuration looks like. We posted this out on our blog site, but this is the seat that Butch and Sunny will ride on. There's some straps. The space station program allowed us to use some of the foam and some configuration, and this is out there for you to see. And I think we have one more shot of kind of what the normal config is. This is the normal config of the cockpit, where you see the 4 seats. The commander and pilot sit in the middle of S2 and 3, and then we have C5, C6, and C7 cargo locations. You can see bags and cargo that are typically there. That was removed on Crew 8 for the contingency configuration. So we'll take a little bit of time to deconfigure those seats. Other than that, we're ready to go. We're watching the timeline very carefully over the evening. We've got a couple things to close out, but we're excited to be here. I really would like to thank our entire CCP team, the SpaceX team. The word that comes to mind for this flight is agility. Lots of agility in terms of changing the manifest, changing the cargo config, and being ready to go fly off Pad 40. And then I'd also like to thank the FAA, the Coast Guard, the United States Space Force, DoD Det-3, that's our partners for crew rescue, and then the Eastern Range all contribute to making this flight possible. With that, I'll turn it over to Dina.
All right. Thank you, Steve. So we've had a lot of great reviews leading up to this point, and I'll just say that the International Space Station is ready and excited to receive the vehicle and its crew. We are looking forward to the docking, as Steve mentioned, at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, thereabouts on Sunday. And then soon after that, we'll have hatch opening around 7:15 p.m. and then a welcome home ceremony a few minutes later. So as Steve mentioned, we'll have a little bit longer handover. So we call it a 7+2, so 7 full days of handover plus the docking day and the undocking day. We're targeting approximately October 7th. As many of you are aware, that date could vary depending on where, for example, if we have good weather or not in Florida for a splashdown, which would then tell us whether we can or can't undock on that day, whether or not our handover is going well with the crew. But that's approximately the target date that we're looking for. So we have currently 9 crew on board ISS. We have the 4 Create guys, and we have the 3 7U2S Soyuz guys that just arrived. As Jim mentioned, we're excited that we had a great crew exchange earlier with the Soyuzes earlier this month. And then, of course, we have Butch and Sunny. And so then when Nick and Alex arrive, that'll be 11, but we'll quickly get back down to our standard complement of 7. And so that's good from a planning perspective and consumables and manifesting for us in terms of hardware. I'll mention that Sunny Williams is the commander of the International Space Station and will be for the next several months. I'll just say the next several months are going to be very busy. Jim alluded to us being very busy. I will say we're absolutely, ISS is a busy place. First, very soon after Crew 8 undocking, we're going to do a port relocate where the Crew Dragon that we're sending up now, Crew 9, will be relocated to the Zenith port. And then we'll be doing our Russian crew will be ingressing the aft progress to be offloading cargo around mid-October. And then at the end of October, we've got the SpaceX 31 mission. That mission is going to have a lot of science. We're looking forward to that. And Jennifer, to my left, our chief scientist, is going to tell us a little bit about that. It's about a month-long mission, and then we'll be doing a progress exchange, meaning that on the Zenith port on the Russian segment, we'll have a progress undock, and then we'll have a progress launch and dock, bring up a fresh progress for the Zenith around mid-November. And then in the December and January timeframe, we are starting to plan for 3 EVAs, approximately 3 EVAs in that timeframe on the U.S. operating segment, and then possibly there may be a Russian EVA as well that'll take place in the December timeframe. So a lot is going on in that regard. As you know, we have hundreds of experiments ongoing on ISS, and I would like to highlight a couple. I wanted to point out that we'll be, on this upcoming expedition, we'll be growing lettuce, and we'll be looking for its moisture conditions and how that impacts its nutritional quality, how it impacts microbial growth. But lettuce is something that folks can relate to, so I wanted to poke on that one. I'll say that another experiment that I wanted to highlight is that we'll be studying crew member vision changes, and we do that. It's sort of ongoing. This particular experiment, though, will be testing whether or not vitamin B would prevent or mitigate some of the issues that we're having with our crew members' eyes. So those are a couple of items. I did want to also mention that Jennifer will give a little bit more detail, but we are going to be training all of our assets on the hurricane and its aftermath to try to help folks out. There's some standard cameras and such, but as well we go through our science community to try to help where we can. So I want to thank the entire team for getting us to this point, the International Space Station team, including the international partners. I want to thank the Commercial Crew Program and SpaceX, all of our partners for getting us up to this point. Like I said, the ISS is ready, and we are really looking forward to seeing this crew on board. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Dina. As Dina mentioned, it's going to be a very busy increment, and science is no exception. We have a fast-paced plan for the crew. We typically, in any given increment, fly anywhere from 200 to 250 investigations, and right now that is roughly what's planned for increment 72. We have a variety of science that we're going to be doing on ISS, from biological to physical sciences, space science, tech demos, human research, STEM and outreach, as well as earth science. Dean also mentioned, as part of our earth science support, right now we are supporting the disaster response coordination system by providing imagery from both our cameras and assets on board, as well as crew when they're available, and we have available targets in support of Hurricane Helene. So we will continue that as the storm progresses. There are a couple experiments I just want to highlight for this increment coming up. It was mentioned that the crew is going to be doing an EVA in December, and one of those objectives is to repair NICER, which is one of our external instruments. NICER is the Neutron Star Interior Composition Explorer. It's an X-ray telescope which is located external on ISS. And it's taking a look at neutron stars. Neutron stars are the glowing cinders that are left behind after a massive explosion in a supernova, and they're the densest objects in the universe. NICER studies the extraordinary physics of these stars. In May of 2023, NICER developed a light leak, and that allows unwanted sunlight to enter the instrument, and it was a result of damage to the filters that cover NICER's X-ray concentrators. So this damage does allow the sunlight to reach the detectors inside, degrading the science during daytime. We still are able to get valuable science from the instrument during nighttime, but this has been a really robust instrument. It's published one of the highest numbers of publication rates we've had on ISS, and we're looking forward to going out and repairing those filters with a patch so we can get NICER back up to its full capability. We do have some science actually flying on the Crew 9 vehicle with the crew. One of those investigations is rhodium plant life. This is through the ISS National Lab. It is the LEO Integrated Floriculture Experiment, LIFE, which studies how radiation and gravitational forces at different orbital altitudes affect plant physiology. The plant they're going to be looking at for this is Arabidopsis. This is one of our model organisms we study very frequently, also known as mustard seeds. And they're going to be taking a look at both a wild-type normal plant as well as a genetic mutant to see what the response is to varying radiation. A sister experiment was flown on the commercial flight Polaris Dawn recently. And we will compare, or the researchers will compare that with the samples that are coming back from ISS. This is also the first mission using new hardware for this experiment. The second experiment I want to highlight that's going to be flying on the vehicle with the crew is Genes in Space. This is also flying through the ISS National Lab, and this is a student experiment. Their Genes in Space program partners students with practicing scientists to study genetics on ISS. This one is taking a look at how spaceflight may activate retrotransposons. So these are mobile fragments of genetic code that insert themselves into host DNA. This is a common occurrence, but when it's inserted into disadvantageous regions, this can cause issues. Here on the ground, it can lead to different diseases, including things like cancer. So understanding the behavior of how these activate and may behave in microgravity or could be induced by stress responses could shed light on potentially some genetic risks or how this mechanism works. So this particular experiment is going to be looking at both the mechanism as well as a new way of imaging these segments of DNA. And then Dina also mentioned the plant habitat experiment. This is going to be outgrowing our outrageous red romaine lettuce, and it's going to be under several different water stress conditions. So we're going to be looking at drought, flooding, and then alternating drought and flooding, where we basically rescue a plant after it has experienced drought, and then normal conditions as well. So we'll be taking a look at how that impacts the plant overall, as well as the microbiology of the plant.
Thank you so much. Interesting science as always. Let's now bring in Bill, again joining us virtually from SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Bill, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you fine, and it's great to be with you today. Again, on behalf of the SpaceX team, it's really a privilege to be part of this amazing activity on board Space Station and these crew rotation flights. As we talked about earlier and the teams talked about, the ability to be agile, to shift and move things around is extremely important. And being able to launch off of Pad 40 for the first time with crew is also pretty exciting. So I think the teams are ready. We did a detailed launch readiness review today. We've got the vehicle back out on the pad. We're in the Dragon starting to configure things. We've got some cargo to get loaded and put in place and get ready to go. You know, also this week, we did a detailed review of the Polaris Dawn mission where we went over all the details of that mission. We got an extremely detailed look at the Dragon vehicle in free flight for an extended period of time. That information then carries over directly to this mission we're about ready to go do. So we have extra confidence in our Dragon systems. We have extra confidence in our Draco thrusters and the fact that we did some really demanding burns on that mission, and they all worked extremely well. We've made some changes to the dehumidifier system on board Dragon. We got to check those out again on Polaris Dawn, and we brought that forward. We also got a lot of good comments from the Polaris Dawn crew, and we'll make sure we share that with the broader spaceflight community and make sure we all learn together, because again, this is really a team effort moving forward. As Steve talked about, You know, we had excellent weather information, so we were able to complete the dry dress activity and the static fire, and then we knew the winds would be too high for our vehicle to stay out on the pad, so we were able to lower the vehicle, get it into the hangar, safely ride out the storm, and then when the winds passed this morning, we were able to get back out after the winds had passed and we're back in a satisfactory configuration, get the vehicle ready to go fly. Also, as Steve talked about, we had a kind of unique situation where the winds were pretty much out of the east and it blew some soot back on the Dragon vehicle. We saw that on the Dragon vehicle. We cleaned it off, and then we went ahead and repainted some areas, especially on the radiators. It's important that the radiators radiate heat at the proper way to space. So we had to put some new paint on to get that back to the right emissivity and the right reflectivity and absorptivity of the solar radiation that hits those panels, so they'll reject the heat properly. I think it's kind of neat that some of the paint we use was actually tested on board space station as part of the materials in space experiment. So we took data from the space station and how this paint degrades over time on station. We were able to use that to make sure we had the right formulated paint to go put on the Dragon to go fly. So here's space station helping Dragon to go service space station to transport crew. So again, an ultimate team experience of us sharing data back and forth and moving forward. So on behalf of the SpaceX team and all the folks here in Hawthorne, we're really ready to go support this mission, and we're ready to move forward. And I'll turn it over to Brian, who can give us the latest on the weather.
Thanks, Bill. And a member of the press corps commented that it was a good sign that I was smiling. Well, we'll call it more of a soft smile. We'll leave it at that. But yeah, anyway, you know, it's been a busy few days here, obviously, with the impacts from Helene, which was Hurricane Helene, now tropical depression Helene, and as has been mentioned here, we did avoid the worst of the impacts here on the east coast of Florida. We had some outer rain bands push through with some heavy rains. We did experience tropical storm force winds here with some higher gusts to about the low 60s knots, which is the highest we experienced on any of our towers that go up to 300 feet on the Cape and Kennedy Space Center. And of course, I echo the sentiments of my fellow panelists. We're thinking about the folks that really took the brunt of the storm in the Panhandle through Georgia, South Carolina, all the way up to some of the severe flooding we're seeing in western North Carolina. And that's really where we are seeing right now where the storm is now centered. So it's pushed well to our north. Let's take a live look at some satellite imagery. The National Hurricane Center has analyzed the center of what is now tropical depression Helene to be in western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee region. And typically with hurricanes as they pass through, especially this time of the year, they get into the upper level westerly winds that help push it farther to the northeast, and that helps drier air filter in behind it. This is a bit of an abnormal situation where it's interacting with an upper level low just to the west, and that's helping pull the center of the storm a little bit further west. So how that impacts us is as you see, there's this tail that goes out off the Carolina coast and wraps back down towards Florida. One of my colleagues, Arlena, calls it a tropical trailing trough. And what happens is that's going to kind of get stuck on top of us. So it's going to leave this remnant boundary that will focus moisture in central Florida and along the ascent corridor as well. So that will help to some degree increase the precipitation and potentially lightning chances in our area through the next few days as we get our typical afternoon heating. We're still in the wet season here in Florida, so in the afternoon we do see some storms and showers that develop due to the afternoon heating that we get here on the peninsula. So let's go to our launch forecast here. You can see we are at a 45% probability of violation or 55% chance of go with this instantaneous launch window at 1:17 p.m. tomorrow. I'd be a little more pessimistic if it was later in the afternoon. That's when the bulk of the shower and storm activity typically in this type of pattern with south-southwesterly flow. But I think it'll be just before the worst of the storm coverage develops. But we will be watching some popped up showers and storms that form on the peninsula and start moving from west to east. So we'll be watching those kind of hit or miss pop-up showers, and that's what we will be tracking here at the launch site for that opportunity tomorrow. And then as we go the next day, a pretty similar pattern, but the launch window does move 20, 25 minutes earlier. So that actually does help a little bit in terms of the afternoon heating that we see. So we bump up the probability of go a little bit up to 60%. And then, of course, for all crewed launches, it's not just the weather at the launch site that we're watching. We're working very closely with our colleagues over at the Space Flight Meteorology Group in Houston, and we're monitoring the weather along the ascent corridor. So there's some key points that we're looking at in terms of winds, waves, precipitation, lightning, among other criteria. And in this case, the winds and waves generally look pretty good along the ascent corridor. The watch item will be precipitation and lightning. So we'll be monitoring that in real time tomorrow, both at the launch site and along some points along the ascent corridor. But hey, no matter what Mother Nature throws at us, the launch weather team will be ready to go, and we'll be obviously watching things very closely. Megan, back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys, for those opening remarks. We're now going to open it up to questions. For those in the room, you know the drill. Raise your hand. Wait for a mic to get to you. For those on the phone, press *1 to get into the question queue, and then to remove yourself from the queue, that would be *2. Okay, let's start with Marcia here.
And Associated Press, probably for Steve, but I'm not sure. Is the plan still to fly up the one SpaceX suit for Butch? There's already one up there for Sunny. Is that still the plan? And anything else you're taking specifically for those two? And I know you guys like to rotate crews every 6 months, but what would have prevented you from cutting this mission a little short after a couple months to bring those two home sooner? And just, is it easy to rotate your missions and be more flexible in how you schedule them, or is it too much in stone to always want to do a spring and a fall? If you could just explain it, because when I tell my neighbors and people that you're going up to get them, they think they're coming back right away, and they're perplexed, as am I.
Okay, yeah, I'll address your questions partially. Yeah, in terms of the suits, there's Sunny has a suit on orbit. She's tried that suit on. That suit does fit. We are carrying up a suit for Butch on Crew 9. We're also carrying up a few other things. There's some earpiece components that go with the suit, some umbilicals that will need to fly up. Those are all going up associated with the suits. And so that's the main hardware that's going up for Butch and Sunny that I would like to talk about. You know, we talked a lot about what to do in terms of when to rotate them back down. You know, when we look at the vehicles that we have ready and the flights, it just made a lot of sense to go ahead and rotate them back down with Crew 9 and have the 2 empty seats. And then obviously the Crew 8 vehicle, you know, wasn't the right time to bring them back down. And so we could, you know, schedule it a little shorter increment, then not have to have another vehicle ready. And so when we work with SpaceX, that next vehicle for Crew 10, that's going to be in the February timeframe. That's a brand new Dragon we're trying to get ready. We'd like to fly that Dragon and space out kind of the flights across all the Dragons. And so really that was the reason. And we'll just keep Butch and Sunny there a little longer, about 8 months. Of course, Nick and Alex will stay for about 5 months, and then we'll bring them back down. So it's a brand new Dragon, and really it's how do we space out these flights, right? So.
Great. We'll go to Will right behind Marcia there. Thank you.
Hi, Will Robinson-Smith with Spaceflight Now. Thanks so much for taking the time. Question for Steve and perhaps Ken. How was the decision made on who would remain flying on Crew 9? I imagine Alex's seat was probably secure with the seat swap with Roscosmos, but how was it decided that Nick Hague would be the one to remain on this mission as opposed to Xena, who was training as commander? Thanks.
Well, we turned that over to our team in FOD. And they looked at kind of the skill mix of the crew and decided that it made the most sense to have Alexander and Nick fly together and move Xena to a later flight. But I know it was a really close call for them. They were thinking very hard about flying Xena. But in this situation, it made sense to have somebody who had at least one flight under their belt aboard the vehicle.
Okay.
And Steve may have more to add there.
No, I think you answered it very well, Ken.
Let's keep it on this side of the room right there, behind Will.
Gina Sinceri, ABC News. I think this is for Steve. We know this is a crew rotation mission. There's a certain segment that's calling it a rescue mission. Does the description of this mission fall maybe someplace in the middle, and if so, what would that be?
Yeah, I really look at it as a crew rotation mission where we, you know, are going to rotate the crews and we just happened to have 2 crew members already there a little early. So really, in my mind, it's bringing Butch and Sunny back at the end of an increment. They have really joined the space station increment team. They're doing increment ops now. And so, when they return on Crew 9 in the late February timeframe, it's really part of a rotation versus a rescue mission.
Okay, this side of the room, right here.
Hi, Ken Kramer, Space Up Close. Thanks for all the great information. My question is for Bill and Steve and Ken, actually. I would like to follow up on the Polaris Dawn. You did, you went into a high radiation environment and you completely decompressed the Dragon. I'd like to know what did you learn? Did anything go wrong, or what was the good things that you learned about it? And how would that, with the radiation and the decompression, how will that help the ISS missions and the Artemis missions to the moon? Thanks.
Yeah, I can answer some of those if you want. I would say, first of all, I think we have a contingency case where we can depress the Dragon capsule, and we tested that before on the ground, but we've never really tested that in space. So now what was a kind of an untested contingency case has now been fully tested. The high radiation environment, we got to build a lot of auto sequences that actually rebooted hardware and recovered the hardware automatically without any interaction from the crew. So again, I think that helps us have a more robust capsule that demonstrates what it needs to go do as we do the transportation missions to and from space station. I think also as we look further out and we're going to do things around the moon in a higher radiation environment, getting some experience there is important. Checking out the new spacesuits and getting mobility that we do with Polaris Dawn is there. So I see these as very complementary activities that we use the Polaris Dawn mission to stretch some capabilities, to prove some capabilities that then actually show we have the robustness and reliability needed for the missions to and from space station.
Yeah, you want to go, Steve?
From our perspective, we got to follow along with a lot of the development of Polaris Dawn, the suit development, and the chambers at the Johnson Space Center. As Bill said, there's a couple things that really we benefit from. We do have a contingency case for every Dragon mission. If there were some event in the atmosphere you needed to purge it out, we can lower the pressure, even take it to vacuum. So we've tested that on the ground, as Bill said, but now they did it on orbit. We can learn as you repress how the ecosystem performs, the rates and the cooling and so forth in the components to make sure that all works just fine. It was a stressing entry for the heat shield, I would say. A little higher velocity, a little higher orbit. We get to benefit from that in terms of looking at how the heat shield performs. Every time we come back, we actually flew the NASA WB-57 aircraft for the Polaris Dawn mission to image the parachutes and watch their inflation and watch how they performed. And then we sit side by side with SpaceX when they bring the vehicle back and look through the parachute data and then see how the parachutes perform. So that benefits us for every single flight. And then really, it also stressed the ecosystem, I would say. They stayed on orbit for about 5 days. Our missions are pretty short duration, about a day to space station and a day on the way back. And so we learn from how Polaris Dawn stresses the ecosystem. And I'll let Ken talk about the exploration aspects.
Yeah, and from a headquarters point of view, I love the Polaris Dawn missions. They show what we're trying to do as we develop the commercial LEO, low Earth orbit ecosystem. They show the advantages of allowing providers to own the vehicles and use them in different ways that the government might not think of. But really selfishly, I like them because I don't have to pay for them. I have vehicles in the flow that if there was a crisis on station, SpaceX could work with us to talk to the Polaris Dawn team and see if we could get access to that vehicle first for some sort of contingency. And our human research folks, especially our team at the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, TRISH, they work with the Polaris Dawn teams to gather science data on those missions, and we benefit from that science data, the radiation data that you mentioned. So there's lots of great things about it.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. We'd like to give our folks on the phone a chance to ask a question now. Let's go to Jonathan Siri of Fox News.
Thanks so much for doing this. My question is for Steve. For the backup launch days on Sunday and Monday, what are the specific times you're looking at? And then if you could explain for a general audience how you determine an instantaneous launch window. Are you looking for the most efficient trajectory to the ISS or the safest trajectory or both?
Yeah, I'll take the first question. The backup launch times on Sunday, September 29th, it's 12:54 p.m. Eastern in the afternoon, so it gets about 23 or 24 minutes earlier a day. And then on Monday, the launch time is 12:32 p.m. Eastern. And both those dockings are roughly 28 hours or so. So the way the launch window gets determined is a little complicated. If you think about the space station orbit, the orbit is at a 51.6 degree inclination about the Earth, and essentially it rotates, as the Earth rotates, we rotate into the plane of the space station orbit. And that happens, and we want to launch to the north, so it happens once a day for the launch site here at the Kennedy Space Center. And so that launch time that we choose is a launch time that allows us to launch in the most efficient propellant manner with both the Dragon propellant and then the Falcon 9 propellant, such that we get into that orbit at the right time to expend the least amount of propellant. We have altered the launch trajectory a little bit compared to most of the Falcon 9 flights that SpaceX flies to optimize for abort. So we fly what I would call a little bit more depressed trajectory to make sure that the Gs aren't too high should the capsule have to leave the launch vehicle and re-enter. But it's really that we choose a time such that we minimize the propellant and launch into the space station orbit that comes by once a day. So.
Great, thank you for that question. Jeff Faust, Space News, also on the phone.
Hey, good afternoon. Question for Bill Gerstenmaier. Curious, any lessons learned from the 4 years of flying Crew Dragon missions from Pad 39A that you applied when you were setting up the crew tower and systems at Pad 40? Thanks.
Yeah, I think we carried a lot of the things forward from 39A into Pad 40. I don't think there's anything too special there. I think you'll see the crew escape system where we have the slide wires at 39A. We have slide chutes at 40. We think those are actually more effective for the crew in an emergency case exiting the launch tower. Those are actually a little more convenient than the baskets that are kind of a one-way device. These can be used multiple times and they're deployed. But I think in general, we optimized some of the Dragon systems, some of the cooling systems, some of the water systems on the pad are more optimized for Dragon and for those activities than they are at 39A. So I think we picked up a little bit from 39A and moved it to 40, but in general, it's roughly the same capability in both pads.
Great. All right, one more in the room. One more on the phone. Stephen Clark, Ars Technica.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I think my question's probably for Gerst as well. Can you talk about the contingency capability for propulsive splashdown? I know that was a part of the original vision for Crew Dragon, and it sounds like you're bringing back some of that capability, at least in a contingency mode. How did you certify this for this mission?
Yeah, we've actually flown it on several other Dragon flights before this. This is the first time it flies on a NASA mission. The way it works is in the case where all the parachutes totally fail, this essentially fires the thrusters at the very end that essentially gives the crew a chance to land safely and essentially escape the vehicle. So it's not used in any partial conditions. We can land with one chute out, we can land with other failures in the chute system, but this is only in the case where all 4 parachutes just do not operate. In that case, the capsule detects that there's a problem and it fires essentially the Draco thrusters at the very end and then provides a tolerable landing for the crew. So it's a true deep contingency. But again, I think our philosophy is rather than have a system that you don't use, even though it's not maybe fully certified, but it gives the crew a chance to escape a really bad situation, we put that in place. And that's the way this propulsive landing system works.
All right, let's go back to the room before going back to the phones. right here. Thank you.
Maybe this is a bit of overkill. I'm Jean Wright from Space Up Close. I have another question about the soot condition. How caustic it was, what kind of composition was there. When we did surface prep on the shuttle, that's the first thing I thought of. We had to do surface prep before we did anything to it. And I'm just wondering, with the conditions, with the hurricane conditions, we had to maintain certain specs for humidity and temperature. And I know it's done inside. Can you tell us what kind of paint? Is it proprietary? It probably is. I'm just curious as to what kind of, because it is a special conditions with the storm, how you were able to maintain all that with the specs that we used to have to do for shuttle. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start and then see if Bill has anything to add. Yeah, the paints that SpaceX uses are typical space grade paints. What happened was when the soot got onto the various parts of Dragon, the first thing we tried to do is go wipe it off, right? It wiped off most of the areas pretty well. The solar arrays, we were able to just wipe it off and clean it to make sure. Obviously, you don't want to degrade the solar arrays. You want to make sure that it has a good charging capability. It wiped off a lot of what's called the spam, a lot of the thermal protection system. The one area that we had some trouble is there's a special paint used on the radiators. We had a lot of trouble getting that the soot off of there. And so it essentially, that paint is a bit porous, and so it kind of absorbs the hydrocarbon soot. And so since we couldn't wipe it off, we went in, SpaceX did a wonderful job of adding about 3 coats of paint to that area. This is primarily on quadrant 1 on the radiator on the trunk. We had to go then look at that additional paint and, okay, what does that do to the radiator now that it's not going to quite radiate the heat just right? And so we looked at all the different cases, both in transit to space station, and then while we're docked, we also have the capability to do what we call a safe haven. So in other words, if something happens, the crew can get in Dragon and close the hatch and then use Dragon to reject the heat. And that was the one case that was the driving case for analyzing it. And so we were able to pass that case. It didn't really hurt the TPS per se chemically. You know, the hydrocarbon, once we wiped it off, we didn't have any concern for the TPS. But it's something that was unique at pad, at pad 39A, the flame trench goes to the north, and we've just never had the wind in such a direction to where it would blow it. It's also a little longer flame trench at 39A, so we'll go take a look at this and for the future if we come back to 40 again. So.
Bill, did you want to add anything?
In terms of making sure that the paint would adhere properly, we did a lot of testing to make sure that when we prepped the surface that the new paint would adhere properly and would provide the right properties. And then as I described, the paint is special in the fact that it has to absorb certain solar energy and reflect certain solar energy, as well as reject heat. And because of that, we did some additional testing, and then that paint will degrade over time on orbit. So we had to show that the paint that we reapplied will provide the same or the proper properties for heat rejection for the entire 210 days that Dragon is certified to be on board space station. So we actually used, like I said in the earlier remarks, we used data from the MISSI, the Materials in Space experiment on board space station, to determine what we thought the erosion rate of this new paint we applied. So we did a lot of work to make sure the surface prep was correct, the paint would adhere, and the paint would persevere through the entire orbit duration in the atomic oxygen environment in space. So this was a pretty sophisticated activity to repair this paint and make sure that it's going to perform the way it needs to in space. And again, a tremendous amount of testing was done here in Hawthorne. A tremendous amount of hours were spent here getting prepped to make sure that when we did this, we did it right, and we actually put the vehicle back essentially to the regular configuration or ready to go fly and serve the entire mission duration it's supposed to.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. We had only 2 more in the room. Go ahead. The one after him. There you go. Sorry.
Hi, Don Haladiak for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. My question is for Dina. You alluded to the larger normal complement of crew. What are the conditions like? How's the CO2, water consumption, plumbing? How's it all handling with the extra people on board?
Okay, well, actually, things are going great. We do have some considerations, I'd say. So, for example, our crews drink more water, produce more urine, and so we've been doing more urine processing, for example. We have had to take a look at our upcoming cargo manifests. And so, for example, we just flew a Northrop Grumman mission, and we're about to fly the SpaceX 31 cargo mission. And we've taken a look at those and decided to add different complements of food and water as necessary, and other spares like toilet spares. You've got more flushes occurring. So these are all things we're taking into account. They've not been an impact at this point. We're just trying to essentially make the trades in order to make sure we get all the right consumables on board. In terms of the conditions, CO2 is normal. We've got carbon dioxide scrubbing is going on as it normally would, oxygen generation, all the things. Everything is normal for the crew. We have additional sleepers on board, so when we have sort of locations that are temporary locations. For example, we've got a place in Columbus, a place in the gym, and then when we have a handover with multiple crew on board, as we're going to have with the Crew 8 team when they get on board, we also use the Dragon as a sleeping accommodation. So, I think that the crew is very happy and healthy, and we're keeping them all good to go.
Great. And we have two more in the room, Jim, Manuel, and then we have two on the phone.
Hi, I'm Jim Siegel with Florida Media Now and O'Connor Space Tech, and I had a question about the cargo that was loaded kind of at the last minute. I wonder if you could tell us what those cargo were, and if the mission is delayed a couple of days, is any of that cargo going to have to be replaced? Thank you.
Well, I'll just say from an ISS perspective, we have got a standard complement. We do have a spare, for example, on board for a urine processor that was a later add, but it's not needed immediately. It's more just to get us up to a normal sparing posture. If we're delayed by a couple of days, it would be no impact to us whatsoever. So from an ISS perspective, we're okay, and we have a standard set of hardware. In terms of the other manifests, if you're referring to what I was just talking about, for example, SpaceX 31, if it was delayed, it would not be a big impact. We actually keep on board plenty of reserves, and we typically have 4 months worth of reserves for any particular thing like food, water, toilet supplies, et cetera. But we have a lot more than that right now, in fact. So we'll be okay if we slip, a few days or even weeks. We're going to be okay.
All right, Emmanuel. Oh, I'm sorry. Jen, did you want to add?
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm not sure if part of that late load cargo is also our science late load, which is nominal for these flights, and we do have refresh samples if we need to delay.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Jen. Okay, Manuel, and then we'll go to the phones.
Thank you. Manuel Masanti, Exploración Espacial. Dina and Jennifer, you've been describing all the science and research being done on the space station, and we are getting used to every cargo mission rotation, crew rotation, that all the incredible science we are doing. It's like we are using the space station at its fullest instead of science. NASA is incentivizing a commercial crew economy with new space stations coming. What is NASA doing to avoid a gap in terms of science if we know the commercial stations are potentially having difficulties to get there? What are the next the steps NASA is doing to avoid a gap, and if there's a consideration of extending the 2030 deadline?
Maybe this would be better for SOX, but
First of all, we really don't want a gap between our current platform in low Earth orbit and the platforms that will replace it. There's a bunch of reasons for that. One is because of all the science that we're doing now. We don't want to have a lull in that science activity. We could lose researchers and discourage people here on the ground. So we want to maintain a pipeline for that research. And we want to maintain the crew and cargo transportation capability that we've worked so hard